was on a podcast recently. Have you heard of the One-on-One podcast before?
No.
We had him on Sitting Now, the host, but it's always funny because he's kind of a conspiracy guy, so his audience are really conspiracy. So it's amazing. Like, we spend a good chunk at the beginning of the interview talking about how Aleister Crowley gets misrepresented the whole time by those sort of types of people. You know, like how there's like kind of the classic ones, the kill 150 children, blah blah blah. I can't remember the exact figure, but
I know the quote you're talking about. Yeah,
and he's not talking about literally killing 150.
No.
But all these people think he's talking about manually pleasuring himself. Let's put it that way. And they obviously the 150 children or million, whatever it is. But yeah, but it's mad how many people in the audience just didn't get that message, and the amount of kind of wrong Crowley facts that they're spouting at me. Oh, this guy's deluded, and they'll give you a quote that's not even a Crowley quote. It's some of them, like there's one I can't remember. It's like a blonde boy and is the best type of sacrifice or something like that. And it's like,
oh yeah.
That doesn't exist. There is no quote where he says that.
It's funny.
Yeah, but don't you think Crowley had the intention of doing that when he made that quote? He's like, the people that get it will get it, and the people that don't get it will they'll freak out. And Crowley loved freaking people out.
It's what he called. Well, it's what a lot of occultists call an occult blind, isn't it? It's like it's
trolling.
Yeah. But the other thing, I mean, it's like I said in his show, the other reason he did that rather was because at the time in England, had he written masturbation, which is what he meant, he would have been prosecuted. That would have been under the Obscene, Materials Act or whatever in the UK. So he had to hide stuff like that, and so obviously. It's kind of a double-edged sword, isn't it? He sort of protected himself at the time, but now
it's also a funny moment where slang slips out of the culture, because there's a folk song, "Nottingham in Town," which Davy Graham recorded with Shirley Collins, but it was a Gene Ritchie, I think originally recorded in Kentucky. But anyway, the end of the song, it's like a rhyming puzzle song. And the end of the song has a reference. It's the same reference of like 6,000 or 10,000 have died that never were born, and that's what it's talking about.
Yeah.
So it's funny that was kind of a traditional like folk slang, and now people are like, oh, they were killing kids. Like, no.
No, it's and the thing that kind of struck me, sort of reading the comments on his YouTube channel, was that conspiracy theorists are almost like occultists, aren't they? In their own weird way. They're trying to decode these cryptic symbols and signs in the same way that occultists are. But the difference seems to me is that with an occultist, they have or a magician, let's say, they have like a goal in mind. There's they're decoding something so they can do a magical operation or do a ritual or whatever, and there's like a definitive outcome. Whereas the conspiracy theorists, I don't know what the kind of the product at the end of it is, if that makes sense. Like, it's kind of
truth.
I suppose
capital
truth.
T.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's so maybe occult conspiracy theorists are the new occult.
There's always been a crossover. I don't know if you've noticed.
Yeah,
those cultures have always crossed over.
Yeah, you've got the Leo Taxil thing that A.E. Waite wrote against, the anti-Masonic furor in the 1900s.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the interesting thing too about like the Christian spiritual warfare stuff, where a lot of it just drifts straight into like occult practice. So like the conspiracy theorists are because one of the things about the conspiracy theory is it gives agency to these unseen forces, right? And it's an interaction with that, and like the idea that these things could be happening in secret and having power over the world, and then you discover it. But it's a weird disempowering vision of that, because, there's these others that are hidden, that are manipulating these forces. And, here you are, the weak, innocent citizen or whatever, who's trying to tease your way through this stuff. It's really weird too, because when I was doing the Santa Muerta research, it became very obvious to me how even with Mexico and the US, how translation and language barriers like completely create different like worlds that like you could be in the Texas border, and if you don't read Spanish, you don't know that the Mexican military is like moving on like cartels like right, you know, maybe 10 miles away from you. They've got tanks, they've got whatever. And you would never have any idea about that, you know, because it's in the Spanish language news, but it's not in the English news. Right. And like with the conspiracy stuff, it just hits this weird spot where if you actually have an awareness of, you know, the globe as multiple cultures and societies and nation states and all the rest of it, um, it only works in like one language. You know what I mean? Like maybe two. But it doesn't work for an actual, you know, vision of what's going on in the world. It only creates this worldview for this cultural segment that sort of fits that in, you know. With stuff like that, the misunderstanding of what Crowley's saying with, you know, kids being killed. Imagine the differences, you know what I mean? Like when people are talking about like, you know, conspiracies happening in Europe or whatever, and you've got all these different, you know, in the US, it's really easy to just be like, oh, in Europe that happened. It happened in France and then they influenced Britain. But you don't think about the fact that like French people are speaking French, people in Britain are speaking English, you know, like there's cultural divides. They're not necessarily friendly. You know, it gets very, very strange and very kind of insular.
It's interesting. The other thing is that it feels like Aleister Crowley's old hat now in terms of conspiracy theory. It feels like that when you have there are actual occult conspiracies, aren't there? I mean, and like as far as, you know, we can look at Dugin and people like that, and traditionalism and that sort of thing, and Steve Bannon, all these sorts of people. They're all sourcing a lot of their stuff from actual occult material, and it feels like Crowley just. It feels more. I mean, Crowley's. I know he was very Tory conservative, but his philosophy seems very left wing, doesn't it? It doesn't particularly or libertarian, maybe. I don't know. It's kind
very
of
libertine, I would say.
Yeah. It doesn't feel like he's any kind of. I don't know. I've never really seen the connection myself. I just think it's just like I always say, it's a convenient boogeyman, isn't it? I think.
Yeah.
A lot of the time.
They love to trot him out. Like if you listen to some of these conspiracy podcasts and shows, which I don't as much as I used to because I've kind of grown really tired of them. But occasionally I do, just because it's good entertainment, and it's good to like put your finger on the pulse and see what are they thinking now, you know, because it kind of changes. It has seasons, like, you know, like every quarter, check back in and find out what's the new shit. You know, it's like you really. And
first thing during COVID, the first place I went when it first started and we all started to get locked down and everything, I thought, oh my god, the conspiracy theory is going to be crazy at the moment. I spent hours watching Alex Jones and David Icke and all these people just to see how crazy it got, and it really got pretty crazy, but as expected. But I mean the 5G stuff, the 5G COVID stuff.
Oh, dude, like right after the pandemic started, I don't want to throw this guy under the bus, but I have a friend that I've known for almost 40 years, an occultist. I mean, we go way back. Like we go back to the Golden Dawn days, and that was like early in my life. I was in my late 20s, and he calls me up, and I figure we're just going to shoot the shit. Hey, what about this crazy stuff, you know? And he starts laying into me about like 5G and that it's activating. COVID's being activated by 5G, and then like it just like he was right on the QAnon path all of a sudden, and I don't know how that happened. I finally just said, dude, I can't talk to you. Like we can't talk. Like call me back when you regain your senses, or don't. And I've never talked to him since. But it was so crazy to me. Like so many people just jumped on board to that whole thing so quickly, and it just came out of nowhere. Like I remember like, because I live in a kind of a small hippie town, and the 5G thing was a concern for like a small radical fringe here. They were like, oh, the 5G is about to happen. And they were handing papers out in the streets, leaflets, you know, and talking about like when 5G turns on, all these things are going to happen to us. And I'm just laughing because I know the technology. And I'm like, these people have no idea what they're talking about. But then all of a sudden, it went from a small vocal fringe to all of a sudden, like people I didn't expect were like grasping onto that. And I think a lot of it was the fear. When COVID first started, people forget this. When COVID first started, we had no fucking idea what was going on. Nothing.
Yeah.
We had no idea. All we knew is that the bodies were stacking up at the hospitals. That's what we knew. Do you remember the pictures from New York where they were running out of grave sites and
Italy? I mean, Italy, but people like, the hospitals are all overwhelmed there. I remember that's what we saw.
Yeah.
Over here, it was just Italy. Italy looked really bad.
Yeah, and China looked really bad. If you were paying attention in December of 2019, there was a doctor from China that was posting on Imager and other places where he was posting video talking about there's this thing happening here in Wuhan, and they're not talking about it, and we've got bodies piling up, and then people are like, I don't know if that's real, and it seemed like he was sincere, and then sure enough he was sincere, and then the guy disappeared. I heard he died of COVID eventually, but when that started happening, like the conspiracy theorists like just jumped on that so fast, and it was people that I least expected to be on that train were jumping on that train, and it was fear. Everybody was freaked out. Nobody knew what was going on, and they were just panicking. And unfortunately, when some people panic, they grasp at the nearest thing, no matter how ridiculous it may be.
Well, it's like we were saying before, though. So many people have gone back to Christianity because of COVID.
Yeah.
And it's so many people became. Because I mean, the biggest thing with COVID was for me was watching places like Facebook and seeing suddenly how radicalized people became, one direction or the other. It was really interesting.
Quickly too.
Yeah, it was very strange. There's this sort of like huge tribalism kind of kicked in, politically speaking. People that I've never seen post anything political before.
Would have never suspected. Yeah.
Exactly. All of a sudden they're like hard, like progressives, or they're hard kind of conservatives, or hard. It's really, it was really strange to see. It divided lots of people, I think, quite badly.
I mean, to this day, my social circle is smaller now because of that whole period of time.
Oh yeah,
where I had to just cut people off and say, look, if you ever come around, we'll have a conversation, because I don't keep friends just because they think like me. If I did, I wouldn't have any friends, to be honest. But I keep a diverse set of friends who think of a lot of different things. But there's a cutoff point that I have. Like, if you become didactic and start preaching all this hate and crazy nonsense, I don't want to hear it. I don't hate you. I just don't want to hear it.
Yeah, it was insane. I mean, even I kind of fell for a little bit of it at one point for a very brief period of time. When I think if I'm just naturally reactive to things. So if I'm told one thing's bad, I instantly go and look at it, and if I don't see that, I don't see that it's that bad at first, then I immediately react to it. It's kind of a childish response. I need to kind of work on that a little bit. But so I think my my initial thing was, I was like watching a lot of Joe Rogan and Sam Harris and people like that at the time, and in retrospect I'm like, but it's because I was just reacting at the time, without really delving into it and thinking about it. And so even I was sort of jumped in the fray briefly, and I was like, whoa, hang on a minute, and pulled myself out of it, like, which is why I kind of stopped posting on places like Facebook for so long, because I was like, I actually need to sit back and actually look at, sort of pull myself back and look at it a bit more, holistically, I guess, and see what are these people's motivations and blah, 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 and look into the background of it all. And then once I did that, it kind of really changed my perspective on all of that kind of stuff.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, for me, I saw like, because I have friends that are kind of right-leaning libertarian, and other people that are like hard leftist. And this whole thing like really set both of those camps off at the same time. And I was like, I can't get down with either one of these perspectives. So suddenly I had no friends.
Yeah, kind of the rise of the centrist is what people called it, isn't it? Like a lot of people kind of stayed in the middle, which I think, generally speaking, people are kind of center leaning one way or the other, aren't they? I mean, that's kind of the way I've always seen it, but
more or less,
yeah, pretty much. I mean, and then that, which is why it was so weird to suddenly see so many people suddenly going hard one way
veer
or the
off
other,
the center and go either hard left or hard right.
Yeah.
And then some of those people who knew each other were warring, and they were trying to pull you in on their side. Mm-hmm. And you're just sitting here going, look, I'm skeptical of this whole thing.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, we had it rough here in the United States because we had Trump.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That didn't make
things any better. Not help.
No.
And he was like, oh, the the COVID thing, it'll be gone tomorrow. You just wait and see, you know. And I'm just like, oh my god, what do we have here?
Well, we had Boris as well, who was going
Yeah,
around,
yeah.
who's pretending it didn't exist and hugging people, and then
Yeah.
caught it.
Yeah, we were
And then-
all caught on a ship of fools, all of us.
Yeah. Yeah, the irony with that was all of a sudden there was this weird sentiment, oh, poor Boris. And it was like, hang on, you hated him before.
Yeah.
You're meant to be like, and it was like, it's this weird sympathy. I swear that whole thing was manufactured, but it was, yeah. And that was during our time where we had about 15 prime ministers as well, you know, in 3 weeks or whatever.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was ridiculous. And hopefully we're going to get a better one soon. But
You guys were going through that, and we were going through a president we couldn't seem to get rid of. He didn't want to leave.
And plus you had the whole storming the Capitol and all of that stuff.
Yeah, that didn't help either.
No,
Yeah.
that caused lots of arguments as well. Yeah, so it was a wild time. Thinking back at it, it feels like, I mean, it's a wild time right now, obviously, but that felt really wild. That was just something different.
Well, you know, and I think right now what I'm seeing is, and this is not new, Dave, you know about this. It's like anytime there's any kind of conflagration happening in the Middle East, especially if it involves Israel and anybody else, then the end timers, like, all of a sudden they go nuts. And like, I keep up with that because, as I probably said before, I grew up with a grandmother on my dad's side who was a Pentecostal fundamentalist, you know, and she used to take me to see Estes Perkle, and, you know, like, I got to see some weird shit because of her, and I never, you know, I just kind of like sat through it, and I found it entertaining, and I don't think she knew that that's why I would go along with it, but yeah. So some of the stuff I used to hear, and then all of a sudden I'm hearing it again, this end time stuff. So I've heard it before. It's not new, but anytime there's even a shudder happening between Israel and anybody, it's Jesus is coming tomorrow. We all got to get ready and sharpen our swords. Blah 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 blah, and we're at it again. You know, here we are again. Yeah. So those people get wound up about all kinds of things. So they're wound up again. They were wound up about COVID. They were wound up about Trump. They were wound up about January 6th. Now they're wound up about fucking Israel and Gaza. You know, they're always going to have something they're wound up about because they really want the end of the world. They're very unhappy people.
We don't have the 2012 secular apocalypse though. What's the secular / new age?
I haven't heard one.
Yeah, we don't really have a 2012 kind of thing.
I think a lot of people that were probably on that train in 2012 have gone Christian.
How did so many people survive that? Writers. Do you remember there was this whole movement? We did a show. Do you remember we did a CCN where on the day, and we were sort of ridiculing these people. But it was like Daniel Pinchbeck and Graham Hancock, and all these people were all really
Terence
big on
McKenna.
Yeah. They were all on it. But how did they? Because they were all like dead set on like this great spiritual awakening happening on. You know,
dude, this is a thing. This is the thing. So. Way back in the day when I was doing Ong's Hat in the 90s, I made this bet with Nick Herbert. I said, I'm going to come out with a document that says it's all a trick. It's a game. And then I'm going to go back on that, and we'll hit a bump, and then we'll go right on, and people will accept it. And I did that, and that's what happened. And Nick just looked at me. He's like, how did you know that? And I'm like, if you look at the history of this kind of stuff, it happens every time.
Yeah.
There comes a time where there's a renunciation, and then there comes a time where there's a renunciation of the renunciation. It's part of the pattern. It has to be there. If I'm doing a parody of conspiracy theories, that has to be there. There has to be that pattern. So this goes on all the time.
I was contributing the editor to Reality Sandwich in like the post 2012 stuff, and they just kept on rolling. Like there was
this before the acquisition or after?
What's that?
Is this before the acquisition?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I couldn't even get I tried to get my stuff taken down after they got bought out by that whatever that Delia or
some venture fund or something.
Yeah, it was some kind of it wasn't even a venture fund. It was like a weird startup group that was trying to market psychedelics, and I was like, I never, like, I was writing on Psy, like, take my stuff down, and they were like, no, we have copyright, and I was like, damn, okay.
Wow.
But yeah, a lot of people were like, take our stuff down, this isn't the same magazine. It was a mess. But yeah, I mean, they just skirted right over it. They didn't even they didn't even address it. There was no article, like, like,
They don't have
after
to.
the end. Yeah, they just kept rolling. And I mean, honestly, they didn't even think about it. Pinchbeck kind of did. Like, I think he wrote a little bit of like, oh, it was a theory, and we were working with ideas, and the change is still here. It's just ambient. But as an organization that had gone so hard into that, including like hosting events and the rest of it, just like, now that's over, and we're just moving on to the next
Well,
thing.
Daniel leaned hard into it. He did a whole book about it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean,
and Terrence with his Time Wave Zero thing, like, he leaned in hard.
Yeah.
And he just kind of like, I mean, he died a little bit after that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he just, like, you never heard him come out and do a formal retraction or apology or anything.
No.
It was like that. Who was the Christian guy in America that predicted the world was going to end like twice, and people like were throwing away all their money?
Yeah, which one?
There's been several.
Are you talking about the Blood Moon? The Blood Moon stuff? That was I love that. Like, I mean, Joe's like, you're talking about the kind of enjoying the entertainment value of it, or just that the graphics that come out are what I'm really interested in. Like the Warrior Bride of Christ stuff, where it's like a woman in like full armor with a sword, and like flames and like a flaming lion.
Yeah,
it's great. I mean, it's awesome. It's fantastic. And the Blood Moon apocalypse, which was the 4 blood moons in a year that matched up with different festival times. That was great. The different diagrams you had of the blood moons and the rest of it.
All right, I didn't see that one. I don't think.
No,
what I was thinking of was he was like a TV televangelist that.
Which one?
This was Hagee. Yeah, this was James Hagee, who was doing the 4 blood moons
stuff. Yeah, I think I know who Ken's talking about. There's a documentary about him. I think he's done 3 retractions.
He died, didn't he? He retract. Well, he was proved wrong, and then he was like, I don't understand what happened, and then re-predicted the end of the world was going to be.
I think he's done that twice now, and the church still exists. Like, people still go to the church and still support it.
Yeah,
and they take his word for it. It's like, well, he actually forgot to carry the 3 when he was doing the math. It's like,
and loads of people blew all their credit cards and stuff, didn't they? Because they were so convinced that it was actually going to happen. And it was. And
he came out and did like a Sam Bankman-Fried kind of apology. It's like, well, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to do that.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry the world didn't end.
I really thought it was going to, but it will. It will. It's going to this time. I got it. I got it this time.
It's, though, like, have you guys ever just entered that mind space and like enjoyed it,
Oh yeah.
Just kind of just ridden in it. Like, being in, when I first moved to Georgia, like, I spent a lot of time in a cabin in the woods, just kind of like listening to Christian radio and just living in it, like not grasping hold of it, but just like soaking in the atmosphere. It's pretty amazing. I mean, it really, because it gives you a roadmap, I mean, just like, go do your job and the world's going to end. Like, that's it. That's all you got to worry about.
It's weird. Right before the pandemic, I kind of did that with, I discovered this whole subculture of end of the world, post rapture or rapture post rapture, kind of like the Hal Lindsey stuff, but it's like fiction. There's like a whole fiction culture. Like, you can get this stuff on audible.com. There's like these audiobooks, and they're really cheap.
Yeah.
So I was kind of like going through them, and but I was listening to it, and I'm like, so it's prepper. It's definitely prepper culture meets end of world Christian culture, because it's like they go into detail about, have ingots of silver at your disposal because money will be no good, and do the prepper thing, have water, have food, have bullets, all that kind of stuff, which weirdly enough I do anyway. And I've been accused of being a prepper by a couple friends and whatever. I just do that because, like, as we found out during the pandemic, ammo became almost impossible to get, at least around here. You know, and I'm a deer hunter, so like I'm like, shit, now what? You know, so I just stock ammo. It's something I do.
I think the thing everyone rushed to buy here in England was toilet paper. Weirdly,
Here too.
We had that too.
Yeah.
It was like you couldn't get it anywhere. And I remember we actually genuinely ran out at one point, and I found a big load of it in the supermarket, and I was like scanning it in. We have the self-scanning tills here. I was scanning it in, and I looked over, and a couple walked past me, and they just gave me the dirtiest look. I was like, "No, we genuinely do need it.
We got the last one."
It was like, but they were like, "Oh," they're like tutting at me, like as if I would I was part of this kind of panic buying thing, and it was like, "No, we actually need it." It's like, oh my god, yeah, no, it's mad. One thing, you know, I was just talking a little bit to Joe about this before, but when I was talking about looking at this group I'd found nearby in the woods, I started looking into and we're talking about Order of Nine Angles. So I was looking at like what other kind of groups are there that are, you know, kind of super right wing, I suppose, you know, out there. Have you guys ever heard of a guy called Miguel Serrano before?
What's the name?
Miguel Serrano.
Oh yeah.
I have.
Isn't he? He's like Esoteric Hitlerism, right?
Yeah.
Like,
that movement
really
is insane.
Yeah.
And I was talking to you about it on Facebook, Dave, about the if you go on archive.org, it's like a festering ground of Nazi occult propaganda. It's like I've never seen so much in my life, and it's all just there. Anyone can get it.
Dude, Archive has like James Mason, it has all that stuff, like all those old shortwave broadcasts are recorded on Archive. Like I mean, I was going to say, yeah, I'm surprised, but I'm honestly glad that they don't cut people off. So whatever.
Yeah, I've only just started looking into it, but this Serrano guy he's something else, isn't he? It seems like there were two major players. There was a female Indian lady. I can't remember her name now.
Yeah.
And
I know who you're talking about.
It's something Devi, right?
Like, Devi.
Yeah.
I've actually read her stuff, and it's like Blavatsky if Blavatsky wasn't worried about PR. It's what Blavatsky really wanted to say, you know. You can tell. But
it's insane. I mean, it seems to be various versions of esoteric Hitlerism, but one of the prevalent one seems to be that Hitler was a like a spiritual entity, and the body of Hitler was the vehicle for the spiritual entity, and the body didn't realize what the spirit was trying to do, and his spirit was like some kind of like spirit that it was like almost like an archon or something that come down and was like trying to revive the lost Aryan race and all this kind of it's it's insane. I'd never heard of any of this stuff before.
Well, how much of that is in Morning of the Magicians?
Some of it.
So a little bit. I mean, because there's hints to that, and I think even like Reich's book on fascism kind of points to the fact that, like, you know, there was a spiritual element or whatever, you know, to that.
Well, what was that guy's name that did the spear? Trevor Ravenscroft.
Oh, Trevor. Yeah,
did the Spear of Destiny and the Cup of Destiny and all that. Like he goes into that somewhat about you know, some of those weird occult groups that were supposedly around, and you know, take as much of that with a grain of salt as you should. But he did actually do some research that was interesting, which I followed some of that up, and I'm like, oh, there really were these people. Okay.
Well, what's ironic is it sort of circles back to the conspiracy thing. It's like there's some actual bad guy occultists. It's like, why aren't you focusing on them? Like, why are you looking at the kind of OTO and places?
Well, because it has repercussions, right?
Yeah,
I mean, Joe knows this. Like, how many people talk about Ank's hat as some kind of grand conspiracy, and Joe's this like puppet master, but they never contact him. Right. Like, I mean, like, you know, and that's the thing. It's much easier just to create these like weird sort of worldviews, you know, and like just foster this kind of thing in like a closed circle. Because if you actually talk to the people, then you realize very quickly, like, oh, wait, this isn't, you know, if there is something going on here, it can't be that, because this is not, you know. I mean, that was Barry Taff, who was a UCLA parapsychologist who was on the case that inspired the movie The Entity, the book and the movie The Entity. And he was in Thelma Moss's lab in that. And he got looped into the kind of like post remote viewing revelation, like paranoia about MK Ultra and the rest of it. And people, some people had said like, oh, well, Barry Taff was at UCLA and he did this and this, and he was MK Ultra. And his quip about it was like, I'd have better health insurance. Like I wouldn't be
Yeah.
begging for money to get glaucoma surgery if I was part of some kind of grand conspiracy. And it's just, but that doesn't matter to the conspiracy because they're not actually going to talk to Barry. They're not going to look into his stuff. They're not going to know where he's at now. He's a name that they can place into a narrative,
Yeah.
and that can like spin out,
It's the same as the ATO. I mean, my time in the ATO, they always just seemed to be pretty broke to me. They didn't own any buildings. They didn't own any, there was like,
I never knew any OTO people that had money, to be honest. Everybody was always broke as shit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure some of them, have careers and stuff like that, but as an organization, they never seem to have a massive amount of money. I mean, not on anywhere near the scale of like, even a cult. A standard cult would have like, a chunk of cash and a building at least.
Yeah,
but like, as far as I could tell, like the OTO didn't have any buildings. There's no like address that you can go to as a member of the ATO, like that has a space. Everything was always rented, so it was like like in above like there's one in London that was like above a cafe, like a vegan cafe. In Brighton, we just went to people's houses, so it was how I don't understand. And again, like you say, they could just contact the ATO and say we've got these problems, like.
I mean, hell, even Scientology owns property,
Yeah, a lot of property, I think.
Well, like a lot of it occurred to me recently because I kind of was thinking about Terry Thornley recently. That's why I dedicated my last book to him. A lot of this kind of thinking goes back to Jim Garrison. He had that weird theory about proximity. Like if you lived around the corner from where a crime was committed, you probably had something to do with it. It's really a weird theory, but I see conspiracy theorists practicing that all the time, and people have thrown accusations at me. For example, okay, I used to hang out at Stanford back in the late '80s, early '90s. I knew people that were, SRI adjacent. Like if you're going to be hanging out in Stanford, that's going to happen. But because of that, I'm somehow connected to SRI, which I'm not. I mean, I know some people, or I know people that know people at the best, and that's it. And I don't know anything about what they do. I've never been involved in anything they do. The closest I ever got was studying lucid dreaming with Stephen LaBerge. That's as close as I got, And there was some people at Stanford, a student group they used to call themselves Millbrook West, that were working with Stan Krippner and people like that. So, I guess like through like the connection of a connection, it's like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Just because I'm living in the area, I know people that know people, and by the Garrison logic, I'm involved according to his logic. And a lot of people use that logic. Conspiracy theory. Yeah.
I was having a conversation with someone earlier that said the conspiracy community would always look at me with suspicion now because I've come out, and because I never used to tell anyone that I used to be in the ATO. And since I've kind of come out and said that, I've already started to get emails from people and you're just it's like I don't know. It's to me it's I don't know. It just seems crazy to me. But what's interesting, another thing, when I was looking through this esoteric hit, a lot of the kind of right wing, kind of darker conspiracy stuff all seems to link back to this guy Rene Guenon. It's like I'm pretty sure. There's have you guys heard of this thing, the mystic polar tradition, before? Did I talk about this last time? I don't remember, but
I don't think I don't know if you talked about it last time, but I've heard of it.
Magic of the North. It's like this thing that seems to be kind of picking up steam at the moment.
Yeah.
And so there's another YouTuber who's been on Sitting Now. He kind of co-hosted an episode with me called Symbolic Studies, and he gave me a reading list of stuff. So I started to read through these books, and it didn't matter which one I read, it all went back to traditionalism, to Rene Guenon, and it's really fascinating how that stuff's creeping in, like the traditionalism stuff.
Well, I mean that was like Guenon and Evola and all them, like back in disinfo.com and the disinformation book of lies and all that stuff.
Mhm.
They were, they were heavily promoted in that stuff too. I mean, it's kind of like a return of that kind of thing to the pop culture. But it's weird with Guenon because he was actually, I think he ended his days in Egypt, like
Yeah,
as a
he became a
chief.
Sufi. Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird to see his stuff I mean, he did have his problems, but his work, he was really involved early on in like Catholic traditionalism,
Mm.
with
And Mason, he
different
was.
kind of symbolic analysis of cathedrals and that, not in the Fulcanelli tradition, but like in, actual Catholic like groups coming
Yeah.
out, like contemplative Catholic stuff.
Yeah.
And then switched over and was a mathematician, it's weird it's weird how these figures are getting pulled into kind of street culture level discussions, that aren't like.
Well, I think it's because he got cited by I've forgotten his
Steve
name now.
Bannon.
Bannon and by the Russian guy. I've forgotten his name
Oh,
now.
Dugan.
Dugan?
Yeah.
Dugan, yeah,
Yeah.
both of them
Yeah.
Yeah.
sort of cite Guenon, don't they? And it
Yeah.
was I think he gets more of a bad rap because of Evola, doesn't he? I think Evola was the kind of super. He's like the sort of super right wing guy.
Yeah.
Isn't
Evola
he?
kind of
Yeah.
took it to the next level.
Yeah.
It's like let's
So
go ride the tiger with the fascists.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, big
Well,
time.
Evola's whole thing was the rise of like a true paganism, like
Yeah.
a true fascist paganism of like, the strongest.
Which Nazism kind of started out like that, and then the weird thing was like Hitler was like in bed with all these kind of occultists, and then all of a sudden he decided like, oh no, we need to get rid of them, and so like he did a purge and got rid of like all the occult leaning people. Well, except for Himmler,
Yeah.
who was very occult leaning.
Mm.
But
But then
yeah,
pretended not to be.
it's really weird, dude. It's like it's the same thing. Like you see all this return to Orthodox Catholicism, like people that I whose names I won't use, but they're well known in the environmental movement, who were pagans that suddenly like one day flipped, and all of a sudden they became Orthodox Christians. And I'm just like, where the fuck did that come from?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't, I still don't get it, but
That happened
But
a
what,
lot in like the Fin de Sicao like French scene, like Huysmans. He wrote La Basse, The Damned, and that, and a lot of kind of the decadent literature, and then he converted to fairly staunch Catholicism after the
I wonder
fact.
if
And
it's.
who
Oh,
was
go on.
didn't Frater Akkad do that too, or he went to Buddhism, right? But there were some other folks even in like the
yeah, I think it was Buddhism, but yeah,
yeah that but I mean like hardcore Buddhism, like
yeah,
not like I'm a Buddhist, like
yeah, yeah,
actual practitioner,
yeah.
like
Not like
Christian.
I'm an Alan Watts kind of Buddhist.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I have this theory that people are kind of desperate for authenticity at the moment, and that
Yeah.
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. But
a
I
lot
mean,
of
can
the
you blame them? I
no,
mean,
yeah,
really, if you like, again, we were talking about pulling your head out and kind of looking at it from stepping back and looking at it.
Mhm.
Like, somebody recently was talking to me, an interview I was doing for a magazine, and they were certain that I was a transhumanist for some reason, and I'm like, why would you think that? They're like, well, you came out of Silicon Valley. I'm like, that was 15 years ago. It's like, yeah, when I was in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, I was like steeping in Leary and Wilson and McKenna, and I was like definitely on board in the early 90s. Like, this is the new thing. This is the cyber shamanism, and we're gonna, we all believe that, or we wouldn't have got involved with the internet. I think I
Right.
wouldn't have. I mean, I can say the reason I got into programming was because of that. Because Bob Wilson told me to program something once when I said I wish there was a thing, and he goes, "Why don't you learn to program and program it?" And I'm like, "Okay." And that's why I started programming, because Robert Dante Wilson said, "Why don't you do it yourself, you lazy fuck?" Basically, that's what he was saying. Instead of wishing, just make it happen. Um, and even I like 15 years ago started to back up and say, I don't know if I want to put a chip in my head. I don't know if that's a good idea. I don't think we should burn the planet down so we can go to Mars. That's not a good idea. Like, I started looking at all these bad ideas that were being propagated by these people out of Silicon Valley. None of it was good idea, you know. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to rethink all this, and so I did. But for some reason, people have this perception that I'm a transhumanist. I don't know why.
But yeah, it is interesting that this authenticity thing, I think, because I mean, this is stuff. I mean, even like Baudrillard was talking about this years ago, wasn't he? I mean, he was talking about kind of people becoming so sort of almost like allergic to the kind of fakeness of the world that they'll sort of all end up trying to find this kind of returning to this kind of core. And again, that's kind of what Guénon also said. If you look at it's kind of interesting.
The weird thing with that though is the authenticity that if you have to look for authenticity, the only thing you're going to find is a product.
Right.
You know, you're finding yet another simulacra. Like you're not like, that's not the actual authenticity. Like the Santa Muerta stuff again, like when I was looking at the living tradition of people who were devoted to Santa Muerta in Mexico, it was all over the place because it was decentralized. So, you know, you have a vision and here's, you know, a handful of things that you can pull into that or whatever your, you know, people who were more traditional had their own sort of take on it. People who were more like in the sort of marketplace or like in the city and that had their own idea about it. Mm-hmm. And there was no authentic tradition. But then there were people in the US who were initiated by people in Mexico or whatever, or someone that they had met, and they had the authentic thing. And it was heavily branded, heavily controlled. Mm-hmm. Things, this was true, this wasn't true, you know, but when you go to Mexico, the grandma who's devoted to Santa Muerta, you know, in her like 80s or whatever, who's known about it prior to the public reception of it, you know, she's got all sorts of stuff on her altar. Like, you know, if it's a working altar, it's a mess. There's candle wax. There's, you know, bits and pieces of stuff all over. Whereas you look at the authentic ones in the US and they're all super clean, you know, it's like really like, this is what it should look like. You should have these things. And then you find out where that was coming from. And it's coming from like, you know, Magic of Saint Death, like $5 like chapbook at the, you know, local Botanica. And the people are taking that and that's authentic, you know, and the people in the US have no idea, you know, because they're searching for this authentic tradition. Whereas the people, you know, in Mexico or people who had adopted it sort of organically were just communing with Santa Muerta and doing what they do, you know. My friend Hank from Texas was a good example where he had visionary experiences that led him to Santa Muerta. And, you know, he's just this dude from East Texas. And he created altars just based on what he felt. And he, you know, he's a geosurveyor. So he had a lot of different, like, you know, like elk horns and like things that he'd gotten on different jobs around the states and whatnot. And he created these bone altars. And people in Mexico were contacting him for work, you know, for magic for hire work, for healings, for blessings. And it was just because they saw his altar and were like, oh, that's real. Hank hadn't read anything. He was never initiated into anything. He just had this visionary experience that was so powerful that he started doing it, you know. And the people in, you know, the people who folks in the US would seek for authenticity were coming to Hank and being like, hey, like, this is real stuff. Like, can you help me? You know, because it had the actual feeling of power, you know, it had the actual like presence of what it was. And it's the weird thing about this search for authenticity. It's always fake. Anything that you find, you know.
I wonder if
I mean, I understand it. If people want to unplug from the artificiality of life as it is today, I get it. But unfortunately, there's a trap that's set up for people like that. Like, okay, you've unplugged from that. Now plug into this. This is the real thing. Yeah. And so it's a trap. Yeah. It's yet another product that's waiting for them.
Yeah.
It's predatory.
You could look even broader and say that we're incapable of being authentic now because of capitalism and stuff like that as well. That we're kind of.
It's definitely hard, dude. It's hard.
Yeah.
I find though that like I think a lot of the folk traditions really help with that though. you know, like in the United States, I don't know about British like folk traditions, but like just looking at like folk, like spiritual healing and spiritual work stuff, the use of brands, right? Like a lot of stuff that like gets pulled into folk magic, like Hoyt's cologne, you know, whereas now it's considered, oh, that was an authentic thing that they used. But really, what the interesting thing about that is the fact that they were hijacking the brand, and they were rewriting the brand elements, the iconography of that brand. So, you know, Hoyt's Cologne had reference, you know, their logo has certain references to things, like there's like a guy in a top hat and whatever. So it becomes associated with gambling. You know, if you have like Red Devil like matches, right? Like you can use that when you need something that's connected to fire and you know, kind of like the devil, but not in like the black magic sense, but the devil is like a sort of trickster or somebody who can grant you luck or open your path kind of way. But they just took the brands, you know, so you could take a cereal box. Because again, in Santa Muerta, they take heavy metal posters, right? Like, so if you've got like one of those just like cheap, you get it from like Spencer's Gifts or something, or whatever the equivalent is in your area, but just like a mall store poster of a Grim Reaper, you can turn that into a Santa Muerta devotional item, you know, and it simply takes reframing it in your mind. Giordano Bruno's Expulsion of the Triumphant Beast actually outlines this whole process. The whole purpose of the book was rewriting the way that the constellations were seen as a different sort of mnemonic device for uh, you know, working with reality. And so I think that even in capitalism, there's ways for an individual to kind of work with that. It is hard though. I mean, you get sucked into the other stuff, but
it's almost like the only way you can do it is to be rich, ironically, isn't it?
yeah,
It's, you know, it's the only way you can plug out of all of that stuff
yeah,
is to own your
I mean,
own.
I think the situation has had a great strategy with the tournament, which is where you take over the brand and repurpose it.
hmm
You
Yeah.
hijack the narrative.
yeah,
I mean, you
yeah,
know, basically what you were describing, Dave. I kept thinking of culture jamming from the
yeah,
'90s, like
exactly. Yeah,
exactly the same thing. It's like
yeah,
magical culture jamming.
yeah. It's like
Yeah.
psychotronic culture jamming. Yeah,
Yep.
you get like, yeah, and it happens all. I mean, I really got clued into it looking at the Santa Muerta stuff because it was amazing. Like, just the reworking of images, you know, and the
Yeah.
reworking of these brand elements to create devotional items. You know, Eric Davis, who wrote Technosis, he went down to Mexico City, and I think he went to a talk that Andrew Chestnut from Virginia Commonwealth University was giving on Santa Muerta, and he visited one of the shrines, and he was shocked because he was like, I felt like I was just in like like a, you know, like a metal basement room, you know what I mean, just like the heavy metal fans like basement room with all these posters and everything. And it was very strange to him to see this, you know, very devotionally oriented kind of thing, but made up of pop culture elements, you know, that have just been repurposed.
Yeah, I wonder if the occult community is going through an authenticity thing, and this is why Guénon and people like that are kind of
Yeah.
bubbling up to the surface, because his whole thing is looking for this kind of base spiritual principle, isn't it? It's kind of like
Mhm.
he's trying to unlock the kind of thing that the spark that set off all the Abrahamic religions and all this kind of stuff, and it's definitely, it's very magical in that sense, isn't it?
Are
He's
they
looking, yeah,
are they actually engaging with his work though? I mean, because he's a complex author.
yeah, oh
Like,
yeah, he,
I mean
I
that.
think he's a scary object. They like to
Yeah,
wave
that
around.
seems, you know, yeah, more of
Yeah.
like a talismanic reading
Yep.
than like an
Yep.
actual reading, because
Yep.
his stuff is incredibly complicated. And then to truly understand it, you got to go into the history of his correspondences with different people and like what everything was. Like, you can't just like jump into Guénon and be like, "Wee,"
yeah.
going for it, you know?
And I wonder, because when he moved to Egypt, he was convinced that the Egyptian religions, the old Egyptian religions, weren't even the base religions. He was convinced that they were already kind of,
Yeah,
It's true.
like a, yeah, and
I
but
agree.
but so he's kind of responsible for a lot of this kind of pre-Islamic mythology that kind of seeped out you know, that again, that's become quite a big. There's a YouTube channel that I watch all the time that looks into all of that stuff, but a lot of it comes from Guénon, and it's really interesting. So, what I'd be really interested in finding out is what his sources were. You know, so sort of beyond Guénon, like it, and I keep sort of looking for that kind of stuff, like the kind of base magic, as it were, like kind of where the, you know, ground zero. I was looking at the Sabians at one point because they seem to have very early forms of magic, but Guénon seems to have been pulling from somewhere else, and I'm really interested to find out where that was.
It was the European, and that's what I mean by kind of like reading around him, is that it was the European tradition at the time. It was a kind of the, I wouldn't say height, but one of the high points of Masonry, and those kind of groups, Compagnage, the companionship tradition, which was a French kind of offshoot of Masonic ideas, you know, with a more mystical kind of practical bent, in the sense that Compagnage is usually associated with like some sort of craft, right? Like, so like, but not Masonic, not in the way like Masonry is, but actually a craft. So if you're a furniture maker, finding out how the very process of making a piece of furniture becomes a contemplative device, you know, and that kind of thing. I think, you know, Versluis, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Arthur Versluis, has written a lot of stuff on like some of the other traditions that were around. There's a lot of stuff, and this is why I was asking if they're actually reading Guénon, because, you know, even somebody like William Blake was heavily influenced by mesmerism, heavily influenced by some like kind of offshoot Christian mysticism that involved like trance states and psychosexual magic workings, which were prevalent and pervasive in the culture at the time that Blake was writing, but were erased almost immediately after that. And so you don't realize that like a lot of his drawings have the penis erased from it, but the actual like reclined figure with like stuff floating around it had an erect penis, because that was his meditation technique. That was his induction technique. You know, and so like there's a lot of stuff like that that gets kind of like washed away, that was just floating through society. And the same groups that Blake was kind of tapping into were groups that were I forget his name. He did stuff on parapsychology, but he was also involved in some like scrying experiments and stuff. Hockley would be one of the, who was actually he was a Rosicrucian working on scrying stuff. But those circles, like there were traditions within that stuff that, you know, were practical in the sense of how you meditate, like practice oriented, and historically oriented, and trying to find the lost word, right? Or like whatever lost thread of the perennial philosophy, you know. But Guénon was, I mean, at each stage, people are searching for that authenticity. So even Guénon, while he was tapping into this kind of cultural milieu that was around, that was, you know, pushing through it, even Fulcanelli and that, like that, those books come out of that, the tail end of that kind of tradition. But even he was recreating an authenticity that's not there, right? Like there is no actual threat. We've got word of mouth going back for however long, you know, and there's effective practices that can give you visionary states. But there's no actually authentic, you know, kind of thing. And these things seem to be perennial because they keep tapping into things that they're always around, right? Like, so the polar axis of the planet, that's going to be there, you know. I mean, like these geometric figures, like we know, always working with the geometry of the circle, you know, the Platonic forms, but really focusing in on like the triangle, circle, and the cross. And again, those are always going to be there, and they're always going to have the same ways to put the information into that schemata. So you rediscover it, or you work with the other stuff, and you're like, oh, look, this is the perennial tradition. It's just geometry. You know, and it's just geometry applied to culture and applied to human psychology and that, you know. So in that way, it's perennial. But this mythos and this kind of legend tripping that flows over it, you know, that's unique to each culture. And Guénon was on a legend trip. He was just happened to be a very sophisticated mind that was able to create something more with it, you know.
I was really struck because I've been reading Mark Sedgwick wrote a really good book recently about traditionalism, and one of the things that they're all of the traditionalists believe that society kind of broke down around the time of the Renaissance when modernity sort of crept in, and that the only way to kind of get back to this perennial kind of state is by kind of it's essentially the riding the Kali Yuga thing. It's this kind of like and I was really struck by how similar that was to accelerationism. Like, so you look at Nick Land's writing. Land also seems to be, and again, he went very occult at one point, especially, I forget the name. What was the name of his he had like a academic group, didn't he? That
CCR.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
And he moved above a spa shop or something, didn't he, at one point? And they basically became an occult group at that point, didn't they? But it's always interesting. Like, I mean, that's a wild bunch of people as well.
Well, it's like I tell people all the time, like when they ask me how old I am, I said I'm old enough to remember when Nick Land was considered a leftist. Because in the 80s he was considered like
extreme left, wasn't he?
A left academic.
Yeah.
And well, here's the thing. As somebody who went through the search recently, you may or may not remember, like around 2012, I cut off all my social media, everything. I just some people, I just heard on a podcast the other day, somebody said, "Oh, he's still alive," when my name was brought up. I thought he was dead. I'm like, okay.
Was that the Joshua Tree kind of period?
Yeah. I literally lived in a cave for a while. Like, I have the pictures. I lived in a cave. I didn't take the pictures, but somebody else did, and they gave them to me afterwards. And then I went and lived in the forest for a while after that. That's the hard work that people really need to do. So when people ask me, like, what do I need to do? You need to disconnect from everything, and then you need to sort out what you think is not authentic, in quotes. Instead of looking for the authentic thing, first identify all the inauthentic things in your life. And that's going to take years. Like, people don't have the time or patience to do that, but that takes years to do. Yeah. And then you can sit down and start sorting out what do I think is authentic for me? What's my authentic thing? You go do some vigils in the woods, like read some Martin Shaw, those kind of things, like actually do the practice, like sit in the woods for 4 days without food. Fucking do it, or shut up. That's really what it comes down to. And people are not, in this day and age, I understand that some people really can't do that. They can't take that chunk out of their life and do it. They can't do like I did and just like one day decide to go to the North Pole for 8 months. Like, people can't do that. I get it.
No, most people can't. Yeah,
no, but I did. But I just did it. Like, I was so desperate at that point in my life that I had to do it. It's like, to me, it's like it had to be done because otherwise I was going to live a life. I was going to end up living a life that I didn't want to live, and I had no interest in that. So if it becomes that important, and that's how important it has to be. If it becomes that important for somebody listening to this, then do that. Like, drop out, go live in the woods. And I mean, not for a week. I mean, for years. And then you can find yourself, and then you can come back and you can navigate this crap that we call modernity. And you can look at these things that we're talking about, which are the traps that are set up for people like me. When I unplugged, I could have fallen into one of those traps, and I had to like completely shun everything. I get why that's a tradition in a lot of mystical traditions, to shun modernity, because it's in a lot of ways it's necessary to like do a reset. If you're young enough and you haven't imprinted really hard on what's going on around you, you probably wouldn't have to be that radical about it. But like, because you've lived your whole life surrounded by this stuff, you don't know what's going on anymore. Like, you're in 7 layers of insanity, and you're surrounded by a society of sociopaths. So what do? You have to like retreat.
I guess the difference between that, what you've done, and what the accelerationists allege. I mean, I could be wrong here, but my take on it is that the accelerationists want to accelerate kind of the downfall
until
of,
it goes.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and in a lot of ways, it's the same urge. It's just a different expression of it.
On a bigger
Like,
scale, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
but
there's been times in my life where I would have called myself an accelerationist, which is not to say that I was a Nazi or anything like that, but I was like, like, let's just get this over with. It's like, it's going there and nobody seems to want to stop it. So let's just let it go over the cliff so we can start over. That's what I was looking for, the start over. And you don't have to go over the cliff in any other way except for yourself. Push yourself over the cliff,
I think
and then you can find yourself.
Yeah.
One thing I figured out from Evola, especially, and from reading a little bit about accelerationism, is that it seems to kind of encourage elitism, and that's the kind of interesting thing.
Yeah.
So because at the end of all of this, when the big crash happens or whatever, it seems like it will be like the intellectual elites and the rich that will take over and will re-enter this sort of feudalism, and it's like they both seem to end at that point, traditionalism and accelerationism. It's kind of, that's a scary thought as well. That seems way more. I mean, everyone gets called a fascist these days. I mean, that word almost has no meaning anymore. As far as I'm concerned, it's not the fascism. The person getting called a fascist on Twitter isn't the fascism of Mussolini or. It's completely changed its name. But elitism seems like something far more scary to me than fascism. And I really think people should look at that a bit more than trying to point people out.
But everybody's so quick to throw labels around. It's like, somebody that I've known for a long time, picked up on this leftist thing that if you're a radical environmentalist, which I am, in that I like to protect the biosphere that I live in, and I don't want to hand it over to corporate interests that are just going to plunder it and kill me. I'm an eco-fascist, apparently, though. According to some hard leftist people that I know, they called me that, and I said, "What part of my philosophy is fascist?" They're like, "Well, if you actually believe everything, blah blah blah." And it was like this very roundabout thing, and they were just repeating something that they'd heard that's become trendy.
Yeah.
But now I've noticed environmentalism now is the new fascism, according to a lot of people on the left, and I don't get that. That to me feels like the interest that the embedded interests that are making money off of all this, like the plunder and the extortion, has brainwashed the left into rejecting environmentalism, which environmentalism not too long ago used to be a leftist thing.
Yeah. I mean, if you watch the Republicans talking about it, it still is. It's and the Tories here pretend to be environmentalists, but that's only because they want to get back into Parliament again. But it's so obvious. It's like, they're not as sneaky as they think they are.
I think part of it probably is a subconscious reaction to the fact that the electronic world, right? Like, we're going to have battery everything and all the rest of it is strip mining. I mean, that's strip mining Africa.
Yeah.
And now it's turning to strip mining everywhere. Like you said, just killing the planet to get to Mars, And so many of these things that have been sold as ways to protect, natural resources and do that are actually going to lead to horrific environmental destruction.
Yeah.
To make it happen. Just computing itself, the amount of rare earth material, like in just a laptop
and heat generation, phone,
the rest of it, it's crazy. You know, and you look at those, look at the lithium mines. The lithium mines are a horror.
Yeah.
It's a horror. I mean, that's
children.
Yeah. Yeah.
By hand.
Yeah.
In this day and age, mining by hand.
Yeah.
It's children.
And so how do you react to that when you're promoting this idea of green, which involves, this stuff which is absolutely not green, and then, it becomes if you want to protect, you don't believe in this beautiful future of,
Yeah, that's the thing. It got hijacked. Like, the narrative got hijacked because if you really think about it, all this, you want to talk about accelerationism? Think about these people that are talking about I go back to Timothy Leary talking about this in the 80s when I was the whole smile thing. We need to leave the planet.
Yeah.
And And I remember at a lecture that I was at, or not a lecture, an appearance that Larry did in Chicago that I was at in the 80s, he actually said, we're like birds in a nest and we're just going to shit it up until it's too shitty to live in and then we're going to fly away. And I'm like, at that time I was like, well, that sounds cool, but no, it really doesn't. And when you look at it now, like people like Elon Musk and all these people that want to talk about going to Mars, they're doing so, by using up the resources of this planet.
Yeah.
And we have nowhere else to go if we do that. But they're on some sort of suicide kick. Like, so we're going to go to Mars or we're going to die trying to go to Mars. And it's just like, why? Why do we have to do that? I don't understand it.
Yeah.
And that smells like accelerationism to me. Like we're gonna completely, eat up the resources of this planet, destroy the biosphere because we're leaving.
Well, wasn't Musk? He was in business with one of the big accelerationists, wasn't he? The PayPal guy. What's his name? Thiel? Yeah.
Peter Thiel.
Yeah, he was Musk's business
and Mark
partner, wasn't he?
Andreessen, the guy who did Netscape. Have you seen recently? He's come out like as a full blown accelerationist.
Oh no, I haven't seen that.
Yeah. He wrote a manifesto that's been circulating. Yeah, so like I had this vision on mushrooms in Joshua Tree, which it made me laugh for like a half an hour, where the mushrooms were talking to me and they said the strategy here is that we should encourage all these people to build these ships and go to Mars because they're not going to make it. They probably won't survive the trip, and if they do, they won't live on Mars very long. They won't survive the radiation, So let's encourage all of those people to build the ships and go.
It's the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah, then they'll be gone, and then we can like restart a civilization here that's Earth-centric, because this is where we live, man. It's like I like the whole I grew up in the '60s when I thought I was going to be an astronaut. We all did. All the kids of my generation grew up drinking Tang and eating Carnation space sticks, and and watching the astronauts. Like we all thought we were going to be that guy. And to this day, I still want to go to space. I'd love to see this. I'd love to see the Earth from that position, but I'm not going to do it at the cost of like where I live.
Yeah.
And that's what I came away with after I unplugged for all those years. That's what I came away with. It's like, I'm not going to let these people convince me that this is a good idea, because it's really not.
Well, and that's the thing, I think this is kind of the same thing as the conspiracy theories that fail, and the ability for that worldview to continue and for that narrative to continue and to people still live in it and whatever. If you just go out to whatever natural area, go to a tree, the complexity of a tree, the complexity of that process, if you can conceptualize that, like that's enough. You know what I mean? Like you don't need all the rest of it. Like that.
When you start thinking of the root systems and how they talk to each other and the mushrooms.
Yeah, and you can be there with. You don't need a textbook to tell you that. You can be there with it and feel it and see it happen.
Yeah. Did you go to one of my retreats, Dave? No, you sound like you did.
No,
I did this thing in the desert where I would take groups out that were failing to work as a group together.
Yeah.
And I'd take them out and I'd let them fail as a group.
Yeah, that's where it really matters.
I'd bring them back and show them a picture of a tree, and I'd say, "See this tree? This tree did not have to read a self-help book to know how to work with with everything around it.
Yeah,
but you do. You did. You're dumber than a tree. You failed. The tree does not fail."
That's exactly it. I just lived in the woods. And I still
you understand. That's the same thing. I started like looking around and going, I don't need these self-help books. I don't need all this technology. I don't need to go to Mars.
No.
I don't need to implant things into my body, because at the end of the day, that all goes to serve capitalism.
And and that's it. I mean, that's really the
make me a better worker.
Yeah, I got stranded accidentally in the woods. So like it wasn't even like it was by choice moving to the woods. But I hadn't realized the lack of connectivity that was
I remember that period of your life.
Yeah, then my car broke down. So then I literally got stuck like 2 miles, on 114 acres in the woods.
Yeah.
In Georgia. Like it's weird because like it sounds extreme, but it's not. Like once you do it, it's not. I mean, we're just so programmed to think that all of this weird hyperstimulation that we get is natural or real. and it's not. I mean, there's subtle stimuluses that you can have that are equally as entertaining as anything. I mean, like really truly embracing a sunset and the colors and all the rest of it it's amazing. And that's not just hippie talk. I mean, it literally is sensually, like cognitively amazing if you actually experience it. The other night I walked out and it was clear enough because winter's coming in, so the atmosphere is cleaning up and everything. I could see the stars behind the stars, and I've been to places where you can see the whole like sky, where it's just like, oh my god. But this was more subtle than that, but equally as amazing to just realize, like, wow, like there's these stars behind the stars. There's this weird kind of depth there that you can go into. And if you just looking at that and like experiencing it, it's amazing. It's incredible. Like I personally could do that, over any kind of watching a movie or doing anything like that. Or if you have a dog or a cat or whatever,
Just watch
or
them. Just sit and watch them.
yeah, just sit and watch them and just be able to. Because the thing with like dogs or cats, animals communicate physically.
Yep.
And everybody's like this idea of our animals sentient and the rest of it. Well, part of it is that people don't speak physically. They don't understand the subtleties of physical speaking. But when you actually spend time with animals, then you realize that they're communicating all this stuff through subtle gestures, through ways that they move, through how they interact with your body, how you interact with their body. It's amazing, and it's again, for me, it's better than watching movies or any of that stuff.
I just read that some group has identified over 110 facial expressions on a cat that have meaning.
Yeah.
And I tell people this, like Rupert Sheldrake gets it, but some people don't get this when I say, if you spend enough time with your animals, you start to realize that there's some sort of communication, is nonverbal communication that goes on between you, and it's a very complex and deep language.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be verbal. I mean, sometimes there is verbalization, little sounds and things, but mostly it's posture, gesture, movement, breathing patterns.
Yeah.
It's like all this stuff is very, very important, and because we're so immersed in this artificial world, and I'm not just saying virtual reality, but that too. There's just like this world artificiality that we've become immersed in, where we have lost touch with our animal nature. And that's one of the things that, like, if you unplug and go away to the woods or to the cave or whatever, and I mean, like, do it for a long period of time, you get back in touch with that, and you realize that you're living in a world that is deep and complex, like you said, and alive.
Yeah.
Like one of my favorite things to do after I first got out into the desert, because I've been living in large cities and large metropolitan areas for so long, was to lie on a rock in the middle of the desert at night with the lights off, and I was far enough away that I was away from ambient light from any kind of civilization source, and to look at those stars you were talking about. It was actually like you could see the dimensions. Like there's like some stars that were closer, that were brighter, and then some behind it, and you could start to see the dimensions in it, and literally just get lost for hours lying on a rock staring at the sky.
Yeah, it's amazing. The other night, like Jupiter, Jupiter's moved farther away from the moon, but when the full moon was coming up, Jupiter was right next to the moon.
Oh yeah.
And if you watched it over the night, it actually, like the way that the Earth is moving and they're moving and everything, it actually spun around it, and it was amazing. But it took like in order to, you don't see that in just looking up and being like, oh, Jupiter's by the moon. Like you got to watch it over, hours.
You have to watch it for a period of time.
Yeah. And to have that,
not just glance up at it. Yeah.
We've lost that sense because it's take a picture of it, right? Like it's posted online, like it's quick. I want that like immediate fix, but like the fix for that is literally sitting for hours watching the sky as the moon progresses over it and Jupiter spins. And within that, even, and this is where like the Giordano Bruno with the expulsion of the triumphant beast and the rewriting the mythos and stuff, you can consider the different meanings to what that means. If you have a knowledge, or if you've spent time studying astrology, or the ways that you can map stuff out on the stars, it then becomes a deeper meditation on a narrative level as well. You know, I mean, there's so many ways that you can work with the mind and the body and the world, which, you know, for me at least, take up the place of technological scheming towards some sort of Martian future or something, you know.
I'm
And
talking about Martians. I noticed that our old buddy Grush was on Joe Rogan recently.
yeah,
You know, I still haven't seen that. How did that
No,
go?
I haven't. Have you watched it yet?
I know I haven't.
Yeah.
No.
I've seen a couple of things that he's been on, and I was just like, eh.
I'm waiting for the press release. Like when they release the UFOs, like then I'm you know, I'm good. I got my stars. I got my whatever. You know.
Yeah.
Like, I'm good. The Rogan thing's interesting because Rogan is in the media landscape. He's way more powerful than he appears, you know, because he has such a huge and popular viewer base.
Yeah.
So he's kind of like the crown jewel for getting, you know, the narrative out there and for getting these people out there. So they, you know, Valet was on there promoting that Trinity book that he did. And it's really funny to see that it's Joe Rogan who's become like the, you know, the show to go on to get your message out to a mass amount of people. You know, a lot of
He
times,
has more engaged viewers or listeners
Yeah.
to his show than a nightly network
Yeah.
television news show
Yeah.
does.
Yeah, you're hitting.
I mean, that's what you have to look at the numbers. Like he's reaching more people, and they're more engaged.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, so for Grush to be on there, that's pretty, you know, pretty heavy. And they had just they had that Soul Foundation thing at Stanford, which was invitation only.
Yeah.
Kind of the creme de la creme of the current academic.
Pasulka went to that, didn't she?
Was that?
Pasulka
Oh yeah,
was
she
at-
spoke
yeah,
at it. Yeah, she spoke at it. And yeah, it was hosted by Gary Nolan and a guy named Peter Scoffish, who's an academic's academic, but like has done stuff with like policy work and that kind of thing. So he hosted it. No new revelations really. Valet had a nice speech. So once they published the videos, if folks are enthused by Jacques Vallée, he did kind of a retrospective, which I heard was very good. So,
Cool.
Of his career and that. And at the end of it, his takeaway, which was interesting because the Soul Foundation thing with the academic and the sort of R&D level stuff that's going on right now and the policy stuff, it's really focused on tech development. Like just that's it. Like that's kind of the end of it, you know, whether it's medical technology or materials technology or whatever, like it's, you know, creating aerospace things. But Valet said that he was, that was not even the question, you know, and for him, like it was the high weirdness. And from here on out, and he said this before, but like that's his focus, you know. So someone who spent time in Silicon Valley, worked on the development of the internet, you know, worked on the development of AI applications for databasing and that kind of thing. His interest now is solely in the high weird. So he doesn't even care unless it has some sort of high weird element because he's interested in kind of this
Good.
more psycho-spiritual meaning behind the UFO than, you know, getting a new nuclear weapon or something out of it.
Or yet another application that people can download. You know, it's like
Yeah.
That's where
And
I'm
then-
at with technology too. Like I don't do it commercially anymore. It's like I'm just focusing on. I'm kind of returning. That's why I'm writing this book I'm writing, which is I'm returning back to my, you know, first principles, which is why did I start doing the meta machine? It wasn't to make money. It wasn't to, you know, it wasn't to further the cause of AI. It was to talk to disembodied spirits via computer.
But and the funny thing is, right, like that's the history of radio too. Like there's books out now about, you know, the just that amazing esoteric history of technology. That was the Diana Pasulka and I co-authored that piece for that Oxford anthology that was on the kind of secret history of the internet.
Yeah.
You know, because all of this technology comes out of like, weird occult pursuits, you know, and like radio, telephone, and all of that like sit right at spiritualism, you know, sit right in that kind of like spiritualist milieu, and it wasn't Bell. Didn't Alexander Graham Bell, wasn't he making like a spirit phone or something?
Yes, he was.
It
Yeah.
was,
I think Edison took a crack at it too.
maybe it was Edison. I'm thinking of
Yeah.
Edison. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
Edison. Yeah.
Have you seen the the Daily Mail in the UK just released a thing about the CIA? What's it
Yeah.
called? Secret Office of Global Access.
I only want, so I said I was waiting for the press release, but the other thing that I'm waiting for always is the British tabloid coverage, because it is grand and beautiful. And like, if you're going to tell this story, you tell it like a British tabloid, like that.
And usually first. They're usually first.
Well, because they get the leaks, right?
Yeah.
Like, so that's what's funny about that Daily Mail thing is hilarious, because all throughout this process since 2017, the Sun and the Daily Mail have been used to push the narrative when it got blocked by like real, the real news sources, right?
Yeah.
So like, so like if the New York Times won't publish, all right, we're gonna give the scoop to the Sun. Kit Green did that with some of the human effects research that was going on. New York Times and Washington Post rejected it. Suddenly, like the Sun has the scoop, and it's actually got an interview with Kit Green talking about it. And this latest one came right after the amendment. Looks like it's going to be shot down if it hasn't been shot down already. The Schumer amendment, which is going to open up transparency, or try to put in some guardrails to get there, for transparency on the UFO recovery stuff and that potential. So the Grush narrative, right? But as soon as that started to get blocked, now the Daily Mail has this thing from insiders, which can only be a handful of people, right? Like this is only like so many people pushing that exact same narrative. So it's just great to me that they use that to gray mail. It's just such a beautiful example of the way these narratives work and are developed in the culture. Because, okay, you don't want to do the policy thing? Well, we're going to put a tabloid thing out, right? And it's such a beautiful mechanism, that this, like, these, because if you go back to the old tabloid coverage from the 80s, 70s, 60s, and that, a lot of it turns out to be accurate to some extent, in terms of, if not like the end kind of meaning of it, but a lot of the information in it that gets leaked. You can see the same thing with the tabloids on the psychic warfare program. The tabloids covered it and said it existed. And there's some of the writers and stuff were spinning tales on it, but it actually was happening. And you can look back at that and see who's quoted and see all the rest of it to see that the tabloid is this wonderful vehicle for getting information out in a way that's mixed with fact fiction, in times when like more official sources will refute it, and everybody will laugh at it and they'll pass it off. So you can put some pretty juicy things in there, if the people know if they have the decoder ring for what to, see as real and what isn't real. So I loved that. That was a long, rambling celebration of the Daily Mail coverage. I thought it was great. I was very excited to see that.
Did you see the interview with the journalist from the Daily Mail? There was I can't remember which. I've got it here actually. What's the?
Oh, is that Chris Sharp? Was he the one who did that one?
Hang on a minute. Let me. I'm trying to do this without breaking the. Who did it? Here we go.
Oh, you can't screen share on this app?
The Good Trouble, it's called, is the YouTube channel that did it. But I'm assuming there'll probably be journalist Josh Boswell from the Daily Mail. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Christopher Sharp. There you go. Yeah. Libertarian type. So it's interesting. A lot of this stuff seems to be being attached to kind of more right-leaning things, doesn't it? It's because the Sun and the Mail
military audience. I mean, that's the cool thing. Again, like just kind of like dissecting the media of this. You want the military audience. These people are not trying to affect the public. At the Soul Foundation meeting, one of the slides that got pushed out on Twitter was Defense Department guy whose name I forget, but was talking about, or he was petting, I don't know, some government official that was speaking there. No offense for my just lack of caring what his name is to him, but the slide basically was the map of planned disclosure, right? And so the the first thing was to get reporters to be able to report this stuff, right? And then the second tier was the academics, which is where we're at now, right? You got the Soul Foundation thing, academics are jumping in. Michael Schellenberger, who was one of the investigative journalists that did stuff on Grush, he just got a chaired position at the University of Austin, looking at censorship in the media. So, so we got the academia starting to go into place. And then the third one was the public, right? And so the public hasn't gotten there yet. Like I mentioned it before, but I've tracked the Google Trends. The public does not care, and you can do little impromptu ask anybody on the street. They don't care. We've got recessions, we've got wars, we've got all the rest of it. Nobody cares about this UFO stuff. Is anything other than a curiosity. But yeah, like the, bringing that kind of moving that authorization through the process, and that's what this, like the right-wing leaning media, if you want to get it to the policymakers in the military, in the Department of Defense, you're not going to go on CNN. You're going to go on Fox, because that's that they lean towards the military. They support the military. They have, you can see the commercials and the rest of it. They're a military-leaning media source. So you're going to go to them to then push that into where you need it to happen. And from the public, it looks like, oh my God, all these people are, siding with the GOP or the right wing or whatever. But from an operational standpoint, that's exactly who you want to target, because the people that you want to hit with your message watch that show, and so that's right. And doing it in the New York Times is it authorizes it to then be spread on these other things. So to really, like, if you map out this thing, and that was something I mentioned to Greg Bishop, who wrote Project Beta, that I was really hoping that with this academic stuff, that we get less academics interested in whether or not UFOs exist, or who's researching what, or what their visionary experiences are, or the rest of it. And we get academics doing what they do best, which is study dead things. And all of the media and the mediation that we've had since 2017 is dead. And we can look at that and we can map it out and we can see how it developed and we can see those trends. That's where it's really interesting, because the rest of it, like, unless you work in tech development or something like that, and are looking to get a piece, which you're not going to, like, unless you're the top of your field, the thing that we can look at is the media. And, the academics can get seduced by the popularity of the subject and the kind of otherness of it. When I think what would be really effective for academia to do is study the mediation of it, because we have a clear chunk here from 2017 and whatever led up to 2017 happening in the New York Times piece, and to now, where we have congressional hearings and possible legislation and the rest of this, and Stanford hosting conferences, and all of that. We have this chunk of mediation we can look at. That's all online. It's all tracked, right? I mean, this is all there. There's no, it's very easy to scrape that and to see what was going on and what has gone on. But I don't see anybody taking an interest in that end of it. Some cultural histories and stuff like that coming out, or how to frame it through, like, one of the latest books is how to frame it through Plato's Cave and Nietzsche and that kind of thing. And it's mind games, not mind games, but like, it's just thought experiments. But there's actual practical, academic research that could go on that I do hope someone somewhere picks up.
There we go.
The problem with that often is the funding too, because the people that would fund that research are kind of myopic.
Yeah. And it is spicier to get, nobody's going to read a media history of the UFO, but like, if you have a book on, whatever makes the, more UFO oriented UFO stuff.
Yeah. Whatever gets UFO Twitter salivating.
Yeah.
Really, that's you're right. That's it. What's the salacious aspect of it? What can get the hits, the clicks, the heat,
the
including
attention
what we call
economy.
hot media.